Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Smokey and the Bandit from 1977. And this is the winner of my Patreon movie review vote. If you would like for me to review a movie of your choice, then click on the link below for my Patreon and pledge, and maybe I'll be reviewing your movie next month. Smokey and the Bandit is a loose, fun, silly, crazy, enjoyable movie. And I think it's kind of looked at as, I guess, lower class or silly or a guilty pleasure, but you could only make this kind of movie in the 70s. Now, this might not be the high art kind of 70s movie, but in terms of like a B kind of silly 70s film, it definitely does that. It's so improvised and so on the fly and everything. It feels like a fun version of a 70s movie, or someone attempting to do more of an Altman thing, but doing it in more of a fun, populist way. Although Altman had hits like MASH, with a movie, but not the show, which obviously was a big hit. This kind of feels in that vein in a lot of ways, but almost like in a more mainstream, digestible way. I mean, it has car chases and car wrecks and everything like that. And this was Hal Needham's first film, although he'd been working in film for a long time as a stuntman. You could kind of tell that because it does have this feeling of like strewn together, like he didn't entirely know what he was doing, but that sort of definitely works for it. It's something to say about Hal Needham that none of the rest of his films kind of have the reputation and the love that Smokey and the Bandit has. I think he kind of like caught his talent and the talent of all these people at the right exact magic time. And this is really a film that launched Burt Reynolds. Jackie Gleason does an amazing performance, who's like a known like comes to set improviser. It's not like having professional comedians like in the Apatow style throw joke after joke. It's getting that natural raw charisma. It's getting that natural raw movement. You can feel that all throughout Smokey and the Bandit. As funny and silly and as light as it feels, it also feels very kind of homemade. It feels very like you're really capturing something. It feels like you're getting a part of Burt Reynolds that you probably wouldn't get in his other films. I was always surprised, like I'd seen his other kind of 70s stuff. I hadn't seen his kind of Southern charm kind of movies. When I first saw Smokey and the Bandit, I was like, okay, I sort of get why he was a star. When you see him do his laugh, when you see him interact with Sally Field, there's something about that that like makes you want to root for him and makes you, probably see other movies with him. After seeing this, I started thinking more about Burt Reynolds. I was like, oh, maybe I should see more Burt Reynolds movies. I haven't seen enough. It made me think about him as a star and things like that. I sort of got like why this film like lit a fire to him as a phenomenon. He was still a movie star before this, but this like put him in the stratosphere. Although the other film that came out this year was Star Wars, which is the only film that outgrossed Smokey and the Bandit. And this, much like Star Wars, was not expected to be a hit. Opened at Radio City Music Hall, didn't do very well. People didn't like it that much. And then they weren't sure what to do with it, so they just released it in southern states. This is before you do the wide releases, 1977. So you were still like kind of road showing it or opening it in certain states and not in others, and like slowly rolling out and things like that. And they opened it only in southern states and cities like that around Memorial Day, and it started doing incredibly well. And it didn't open in more of the northern Yankee states, I guess, until about the end of July, because they didn't really need them. And when I was watching this, I was like kind of surprised how southern this movie is. I kind of forgot, I guess. It has that in its soul so much, you can't sort of deny it. But I really love that about it. It's kind of a charming southern movie. I can understand if people wouldn't be as into that, but it's not one where there's not too much like you really hate about it. Sure, there's some Confederate flags in the background. Sure, there's like one or two jokes that you could maybe feel are, not the most racially sensitive, but I think they're coming from more of a harmless place where Jackie Gleason is surprised the sheriff is black, and they go, what did you expect me to look like? And he was like, oh, I expect you to be taller. And like, that's funny. I sort of get why people, the very serious 70s, this is right around the time where this is falling apart in 1977, mostly because of Star Wars, also because of this, and showing that like, hey, people want to have fun at the movies. And this was like the 1-2 shot of like, boom, boom, they want to see, good, well-made 70s films, but they also want to see fun movies as well. And I think Smokey and the Bandit has that going throughout. It has that fun energy to it. I can imagine seeing this, while drinking a beer, which would of course have to be coors, laughing with somebody. I imagine this was a 70s dad movie. You're a dad in the 70s, Smokey and the Bandit was what you wanted to watch. You wanted to sit back and drink a beer and laugh along with it and maybe fall asleep during it or something. But it doesn't have the crazy, strictest plot. You don't need to know absolutely everything that's going on. You need to know some things, the basic outline, the basic plot or whatever, but you can like jump in, jump out. It's a perfect movie for TV in that regard as well. In a lot of ways, what Hal Needham does with this is it does feel like a junky little indie film. You know, this is when you could make a movie for a few $1,000,000, and it's not even an adjusted for inflation film. You could make a cheap studio film. And as much as like this does feel like a studio film, it has like, you know, the guy from The Honeymooners and Sally Field, who was a star at that point, and Burt Reynolds, who got $1 million. It's not an indie movie, but much like films like Rocky or Saturday Night Fever, which opened this year as well. Saturday Night Fever, Rocky came out earlier. This film feels like kind of the shoot fast and loose kind of quality that we don't expect from studio films now. You really have to be a well-trained studio director, or at least pretend like you are one nowadays. But I think Smokey and the Bandit remind me of a time when you could have like a lower stakes movie be the second highest grossing film of the fucking year, and people would be okay with that. Smokey and the Bandit has that just joyous kind of energy to that, like the fun energy, like let's just put this in because flow wise I feel like the movie should do this at this point. I feel like the movie should do this, you know. It has a strange flow. I think there's like 20, almost like 15 minutes before you get Jackie Gleason's character, before Sally Field shows up. You're just hanging out with Burt Reynolds and Jerry Reed, and that's like all you're really doing. Those parts are probably the parts where I was like, is this the whole movie? I'm not really that into watching shitty, funny, or Vanishing Point or something. When Sally Field gets there and Buford T Justice gets there as well, you really get into the heart and the soul of the film. And in a way that's smart, because you can get through the setup. You can set up Bandit, you can set up Snowman, you set up your core, and then you start expanding onto it. And it's kind of like someone who understood structure but maybe doesn't understand the production and the flow of movies as well, which is like a big difference. I think when Hal Needham got that, it could flow in such a way that, I mean, the Cannonball Run films are films I think that are fun, but this is one I've always like. If it's on TV, I'll end up watching too much of it, really, because it has that like kind of fun, like kind of like rookie energy. You root for Burt Reynolds to get to the end, you root for, you know, them to work out, and you root for this movie to work out. You know, you like that it will like suddenly have a character on the road who's going to help Bandit out of nowhere, which happens like way too much, way too conveniently, but you're like kind of love the energy too. The plot of this movie is probably one of the dumber plots you can think of, but because it's literally just them shipping Coors beer, that's the whole plot. That's why they're like on this thing. They need to get Coors beer to these guys who want it for this celebration, and basically that Coors beer couldn't be shipped past the Mississippi. Now, before you go, this is just some dumb movie plot. That was actually true at the time, because Coors needs constant refrigeration, as it can spoil within a week because of a lack of additives and preservatives. They have a 28-hour deadline. That's like a real thing, because they don't have a refrigerated truck, or at least I don't think they do, but still, they needed a 28-hour deadline to get there, so Coors would still be good and everything like that. Apparently presidents like Gerald Ford and Eisenhower loved shipping out Coors to them. You know, like, you couldn't get Coors. I think you can get Coors I don't know like the availability of Coors. I'm not like a beer snob, but I was like, Coors? Like, okay, probably make me drink a Coors. But it's kind of interesting. I never knew that was like a real thing. Like, they really, you couldn't sell it in certain states because of the shipping problems and things like that. So actually would be considered bootlegging. That's like a real plot of it. I didn't know. I just thought it was silly. Like, it was an invented movie plot. I didn't know until I was researching it. I was like, oh, hey. I think this is a 70s film that, if you are willing to not take the 70s so seriously, I mean, it's kind of a decade that's known for the grand auteur and big filmmaking and New Hollywood and all those things. But obviously there are other movies than just, you know, Scorsese and Coppola and things like that. And this was the beginning of that breaking up. So it makes sense that this film was such a big hit at that time. People wanted that relief. They were like getting out of the Watergate era, getting out of the Vietnam era, and they were ready to have fun again. And Star Wars is often attributed to that specifically, but I think Smokey and the Bandit took on that energy as well. That summer clearly had that going on. I mean, this is the only thing that broke up, you know, number one with like more money than exists or something with Star Wars, Smokey and the Bandit, and then right under it was Close Encounters, and then you had Saturday Night Fever. One of the best, like, highest grossing lists of movies I've seen, like, ever. It's like, if you were lucky to have a summer movie season like 1977, like, you can have 40 more years of bad ones. When I was a teenager and I was getting into movies, I was sort of obsessed with the 70s, and I just saw this movie because I kept seeing how much money it made, and I was just curious because it wasn't a film I had heard of and seen before. I actually got my brother really into it. I've like watched this in college, and people are like oddly compelled by it, because it's not a film that, like, growing up in, I'm an East Coast kid. Most people, when I watch, every time I watch it, I don't watch it like regularly. Maybe you've seen this, like, maybe this is my third or fourth time. I'm surprised by how often people are like, oh, I've never seen this. Oh, Sally Field. And then they're like stuck and watching it, and you go, you know, that was silly and it was fun. You know, it was actually apparently a guilty pleasure of Alfred Hitchcock's. And I can understand why, because it seems like there's certain films that are slight, they feel silly, or they feel just like wafty little things of air and things like that. They feel like nice little fun little trinkets of movies. But then I think there's something about making one of those really well. And I think Smokey and the Bandit is definitely one of those. It reminds me of like Logan Lucky, which came out about a year ago when I made this review, has that sort of energy to it. And like even Soderbergh's trying to capture that kind of energy. And I think Hal Needham, you know, I don't know the Cannonball Run films as well as I should. I kind of wanted to revisit them just because I'm curious. I know it's not the coolest franchise to look at, but it was like the Avengers for people who liked going on the Tonight Show in the 70s. But I think Smokey and the Bandit has that kind of like just fun southern kind of charm energy. Jackie Gleason is out of control good in this movie. Sally Field I actually really like in this film. It's like one of the things I always think of her with, and she mainly did have a hit, and Burt Reynolds fell in love with her on the set and all that stuff. She's really good in this. She doesn't get to do as much kind of like fun kind of things as this really, or at least how I've interpreted her, I guess. But Jackie Gleason, just, you know, if you didn't know how good he is on The Honeymooners, I don't think he's as good as he is on The Honeymooners in this, but he's still very good, and you know he like never rehearses, just shows up and does it. He did it on The Honeymooners, and The Honeymooners he's out of this world good in that. I will see Jackie Gleason in literally anything. I didn't know Honeymooners as well since the last time I watched Smokey and the Bandit, and it kind of like reinvigorated my love of Jackie Gleason watching this movie. And actually apparently when they released this on TV, everyone redubbed their lines because of profanity and things like that, and then they couldn't get Jackie Gleason to do it, so they got the guy who actually voiced Fred Flintstone, which is an interesting little turn there, that the guy, because Flintstones are obviously based on The Honeymooners and so forth. I like how that all sort of works out. This is an interesting trivia thing I liked. If you are just want to see a fun kind of light, feels like light but really like effortlessly feeling constructed kind of film, you can sit back and have a beer and maybe talk over. You shouldn't, but if you wanted to, because you're on your couch and stuff, that's fine. Then Smokey and the Bandit is perfect for that. I love the spirit of this film. I get why, if you know the previous highest grossing films were things like The Godfather and all these things in these heavy movies, and then suddenly you get Smokey and the Bandit, you're gonna just go wild for it. You're like, you know, this is the fun time I wanted. You know, Watergate, the country's falling apart, can sort of relate to that. I just need a good time at the movies, and that's what Smokey and the Bandit is. And you hear Burt Reynolds laugh, and you're like, oh hey, this guy's a lot of fun. I love his energy, and I think that's what Smokey and the Bandit. It's just an effortlessly fun movie. It's made in kind of a rougher 70s way, which makes it a little more endearing. I was thinking like they made this in the 90s, they'd like Hollywood it up too much, or even the 80s. This is the perfect time. It was made at the perfect time. It was like absolutely great timing. Hits like this need absolutely great timing, and Smokey and the Bandit had it from the production. It had it the right era of Burt Reynolds. You got the right era of Jackie Gleason for this. You got the right era of Sally Field. Everyone was at the peak they needed to be to make Smokey and the Bandit what it was. And it's kind of that lightning in the bottle that all these roads crossed at the exact same time to present this kind of film. I don't know if I watch this like every day. It isn't one of my favorite movies or anything like that, but every time I've watched it, I've had a really good time. It reminds me of having a good time with this movie, introducing it to people, and having a good time with friends. And I think that's really what Smokey and the Bandit is. And I'm not nostalgic for it in the way that was like part of my childhood, but it is kind of like a fun, like star vehicle for Burt Reynolds, and it's just really damn good at that. If you want to sit back and have an effortlessly good time presented by Hal Needham with an awesome cast like this movie's just going to be driving forwards right at you and just let you chill out in ways that it is like the ultimate hangout movie, but they're hanging out in speeding cars and cracking awesome jokes and having a killer cast. What's not to like about that? So if you have seen Smokey and the Bandit and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. And this is the winner of my Patreon movie review vote. If you would like for me to review a movie of your choice, then click on the link below and pledge, and maybe I'll be reviewing your movie next month. Thank you very much for watching.